Hilchos Parah Adumah Perek Shvi, the laws of the red cow, chapter 7. We're at a point in these laws where we've already dealt with the Parah Adumah itself. We've taken the cow, we've turned it into ash, and we also learned yesterday about the water that was filled up and how to fill it up properly in preparation for the ash to then be placed into the water. That's called milui. Milui is the term for the filling up of the water. The next thing that we're going to be discussing, technically, should be the kiddush, the sanctification, which is the placement of the ash into the water. But that's going to come only in chapter 9. We're going to get the details on how to do the kiddush. And certainly the hazoya, which is the actual sprinkling of the ash-water mixture, is only going to come in chapter 11. What's happening today and tomorrow? Today and tomorrow is going to be special halachas related to the stage or the moments between milui and kiddush. You have the water, you haven't yet put the ash into the water. There's something very important that cannot be missed in this interim stage. And that is melacha, work. Unnecessary work cannot be done between the filling up of the water and the sanctification, putting the ash into the water. If any melacha is done at that point, the whole water will become disqualified. We're going to see at the end of tomorrow's chapter, the ash can never become disqualified, but the water can become disqualified if melacha is done at any point after milui, before kiddush. And that's going to be really the subject of today's and tomorrow's chapter, the extent to which melacha could disqualify, how exactly, under which mechanisms melacha disqualifies. And then we're also going to discuss a little bit today, but mainly tomorrow, the idea of schar, payment. Payment also cannot be done for at least the act of kiddush. Milui could be done for payment, kiddush cannot be done for payment. And if payment of any form, even repayment of a debt, as we'll see, is involved, that will also disqualify the kiddush. So today we're going to be introducing these two concepts, melacha and schar. Mainly we're going to focus on melacha. It's going to continue into tomorrow's chapter, and at the end of tomorrow's chapter we'll also deal with schar, and then finish up the idea, this whole stage in between milui and kiddush, and then in chapter 9 move on to kiddush. So that's where we're headed for the next 2 days. Says the Rambam halacha aleph, hamelacha poiseles bamayim kaidem sheyiskadshu. Any work, any unnecessary work that's done by the person who is engaged with the Parah Adumah water will disqualify the water before they have been sanctified, if the ash hasn't been put inside them yet. Ve'ena poiseles behazah, but it does not disqualify the water any time after the ash has been placed into the water, certainly not in the actual sprinkling. So if you look over here, even though the Rambam only uses the word milui and hazaya, the truth is, once kiddush has been done, melacha is also not a factor anymore. Melacha is only a factor after the water has been filled up, or during the act of filling up the water, up to the point of kiddush. And these matters are words of tradition. They've been received by derivations from the Torah's verses. And the commentaries get into it, where in the Torah is this alluded to, and we'll leave that for another time. Ketzad, what does it mean that we're saying that melacha, work, will disqualify the water? Hamemale mayim lekiddush. Let us say that somebody is filling up water to be sanctified. So you're doing the proper milui. And I should point out, before we get into all these funny cases, that it seems like many more people than we might think had access to Parah Adumah waters. It wasn't like some special people got appointed to do it. Maybe they should have been, or maybe they typically were, but it was entirely possible that regular people, completely regular people, could have been involved in filling up Parah Adumah waters. And that's why we're going to have all these funny cases of people filling up water for themselves, filling up water for their friends, because it seems once the Parah Adumah was burnt, again, more people had access. So you have to imagine from that context, and then a lot of these laws will make sense. Hamemale mayim lekiddush. A person is filling up Parah Adumah water to be sanctified with the ashes. V'nisasek b'melacha acheres b'shas hamilui, and he starts doing other work while he's filling up the water. Whatever it might be, maybe he's lifting weights. Okay, while he's trying to here he is putting the bucket into the spring to fill it up with water. With his other hand, he's doing other work. Oy b'shas hoylachas hamayim shememale. Or, even after he filled up the water, now he's walking it to wherever it needs to go, to where the ashes are, so the ashes can be placed in the water. While he's walking, he does some work. We'll see examples of this tomorrow also a little bit. Or maybe he's transferring the water from one utensil to another. Maybe he filled it up in a big bucket, but you don't want to put the ashes into that massive bucket. You want to put the ashes in a smaller container. So he's pouring some of the water from the original barrel that he filled it up with into a smaller container. And while he's pouring it from one container to the other, he does work. Paslan, says that Rambam, if you do work at any of these points, you've disqualified the water. La'olam hamalacha perselas b'mayim ad sheyati lahen sefer. Work will always disqualify the Parah Adumah water until you put the ashes inside of them. Once you put the ashes in, and they become holy, and they become what the Torah calls meinida, sprinkling waters, no longer does work disqualify them. Rather, if somebody is walking with the already sanctified waters, or he's pouring them over from one container to another, once they've already been sanctified with the ash, and he's doing other work, there's no worries at all. It's entirely allowed if the kohen or whoever it was sprinkling the Parah Adumah waters is sprinkling with one hand, and with the other hand he's doing something completely different. It's totally fine, because once you've passed the kiddush stage, malacha is no longer a factor. Halacha beis. That's as far as work is concerned. Now let's bring in the second idea, the idea of schar, of payment. Haschar poisel b'kiddush u'b'hazaya, ve'einei poisel b'milui. Payment is exactly the opposite. Payment disqualifies an act of sanctification and an act of sprinkling, but it doesn't disqualify the act of filling up the water. Ketzad, what does this look like? If somebody says, I want to take payment to sanctify the Parah Adumah waters or to sprinkle them, it's like, look, it's very talented to pour ash into water, so I'm only going to do it for pay. Or you have to be very talented to sprinkle the Parah Adumah water, I'm only going to do it for pay. That water that he just took payment for is like cave water. It's basically completely unholy. And the ash is like oven ash. It's basically nothing. But he could take payment to fill up the water or to transfer them from the place of the filling up to the place where they're going to be sanctified. And then they actually sanctify it for free, and the person sprinkling also sprinkles it for free. What is the reason for this distinction? So the commentaries say, because filling up the water is a bothersome task. You can be paid for the things that you bother yourself for. Putting ash into water is nothing. Sprinkling is nothing. You can't take payment for that. We don't take payment for doing mitzvahs. What if it's not direct payment for the act, but it's payment or reimbursement for the ask that you're making from the person who is going to do the act? For example, the person who's going to put the ashes in, or the person who's going to sprinkle, is an old man. He can't walk properly. Comes a person who's impure, and he asks this old man, like, look, I want you. It's important to me that you should be the guy who sanctifies my water or who sprinkles it on me. But I only live, in Yehupitzville, a very far walk away. Come walk with me very far distance, to sanctify the water or to sprinkle it. So now the question is like this. Yes, the old man cannot take payment for the act of the sanctification or the act of the sprinkling, but he has to now go this whole distance and travel this whole way to take care of the guy. Can he be paid for his time? Says the Rambam, yes, he can. First of all, he could have the old man ride on a donkey. That's not called payment. You give him a car. Yeah, you give him a way to get there. Plus, he can pay him. Now, you can't pay him the full amount. Rather, you can pay him, this is a halachic definition, kipoyel batal, like a worker who takes off of work, shebatal me'oisa malacha shebitle mimena, who is unemployed or who takes off from a specific type of work which they took him off from. Meaning what? The commentators explain. Basically, it goes like this. You have to examine what is the person's employment. In this case, the old man. Okay, let's say he was a blacksmith. Okay? A blacksmith takes a lot of work. You have to exert yourself a lot of effort. So if a person took off 2 hours of being a blacksmith, so one way to say is you should pay him for 2 hours of a blacksmith's time. What would a blacksmith charge for 2 hours of work? But the other way to say it is, but if he's not doing anything, a blacksmith, while he's working for those 2 hours, is also putting in a tremendous effort. This guy sitting on his couch now, or on the donkey on a ride, he's also doing less work. So you account for that by subtracting a little bit from the payment. Let's call it half. Okay, so if a blacksmith would charge $20 for 2 hours, so here you pay him $10 because you've taken him away from blacksmith work, but you've also taken him away from the full extent of the work. So by balancing it out, that's called paying kipoyel batal. The point is, you can pay him this little bit of an amount. It's not called a payment for the task, because you aren't paying him for the task, you're paying him for the time that he lost. Same thing if he was a kohen. You wanted this specific kohen to be involved in your sprinkling. And the problem is that the way you want this kohen to take is going to cause him to become impure. Some Rambams have v'haya mistame. It's going to cause him to become impure. If he walks over the street, there's going to be a corpse there. He's going to become a tamei kohen. A tamei kohen, hamaynato milechol trumasai. It's going to stop him from eating truma. Truma is the food reserved for kohen, and 2% from the crop that every farmer gives to the kohen. If a kohen is impure, he cannot eat truma. So what? So if you remember, in the Rambam's 7th book, when we were talking about truma, the Rambam told us that truma is always at a lower market rate than regular grain, because the demand is so low. Regular chulin grain costs X amount of money. Truma is always cheaper. So if you're taking a kohen for a ride, and you're going to make him become impure, you're basically forcing him to spend more money on food. So let's see it in the Rambam. It's going to stop him from eating truma when he goes with you to sprinkle or to sanctify the water with the ash. So the person who's taking the kohen along can certainly provide the food, the drink, the ointments from regular chulin, which are typically more expensive, and it's not called paying the kohen. You're simply reimbursing him for the fact that he's taking away from his own privilege of getting cheap food at a typical truma rate. If in addition to stopping him from eating truma, he also takes the kohen away from a job, so same thing, he pays him by the rate of a worker who takes off by taking into account both what the job typically charges for the time and also what you gained by not having to engage in that specific type of work. The reasoning is because all these things, that's not payment that you're gaining or profiting from the act of sanctifying the water or sprinkling it. He doesn't profit anything. He's only taking to make up for what he lost, again, either by taking off work or by losing the opportunity to eat truma. Halacha gimel. So now, having defined the two general terms of melacha and schar, we return to melacha, and we're going to take a deep dive into different types of work. Hamamale ba'achas yadai. A person is filling up Parah Adumah water with one hand. V'oisem melacha biyadai ha'acheres. And he's doing work with his other hand. Oy hamamale loy ula'acher. Or you're filling up water, Parah Adumah water, for yourself, but also for somebody else. Oy shemile lishnayim ka'achas. Or you filled up with both of your hands 2 utensils for 2 other people together. Shneyan psulin. Both fillings, the one you did for yourself and for your friend, or for both of your friends, are disqualified. And certainly in the first case, the filling that you did while you're doing work with the other hand is disqualified. Shahamiloi melacha, because you cannot do work while you're filling up the Parah Adumah water. Filling up Parah Adumah water is itself considered work relative to the other Parah Adumah water which is being filled up. So it's as if each act of filling up was done together with other work. We already explained that work disqualifies an act of filling up Parah Adumah water, whether you did it for yourself, whether you did it for somebody else, doesn't matter who the water is being filled up for. If you did work while filling up, even if that work is filling up other Parah Adumah water, it disqualifies the filled up water, and that's it. Halacha dalet. Hamamale la'acherim. If you're filling up Parah Adumah water for other people, only for other people, and you didn't do it together, because the key in the last halacha was you did it together. You did it together, that means while you're filling up this one, you're doing work by filling up the other one. But what if you're just filling up for other people and you do one at a time? Even if you filled up 1,000 barrels, one after another for 1,000 different people, kulan ksherim. They're all going to be kosher. Each one who asked you to fill up one of these 1,000 barrels can take his water and go and get some ash and sanctify the water. Because when you do milui for somebody else, as we're going to soon see, malacha that you do after finishing that milui is not a problem. If you do malacha while doing the milui, problem. But if you did it afterwards, it's okay. Milei la'atzmai, chavis achar chavis. If you filled up a bunch of barrels of water for yourself, I'm not sure why you do this, but you're filling up tons of Parah Adumah water, it's important for you to have a lot of water in stock. So now the question is, does every additional filler-upper considered work that interrupts between the original barrel that you filled up? So for example, the principle of malacha is that you cannot do any work once you filled up a barrel of water till you sanctify it with ash. So if you fill up one barrel, you're supposed to fill it up with ash right away. What did you do? You left it on the side, and you go filling up other barrels. So the question is, are the other barrels considered an interruption of malacha between the first barrel and its sanctification? So the Rambam says it depends what you had in mind. If your ultimate intention was to take all the barrels that you're filling up now, and you're going to put them all into one big, huge container, then you're going to put ash onto this whole massive water truck, and you're going to make them all sanctified as one. So then technically, kulan kshedim, they're all going to be kosher, shahakal mili echadu, because it's all one filling up. Yeah, in different barrels, but your goal is to have one big unit of water into which you're going to pour a bunch of ash. But if you wanted to sanctify every single individual barrel on its own, you're filling up 10 barrels because you want to put ash into each of the 10 barrels. So now, the minute you start filling up another barrel after you fill up a first barrel, you've done malacha between that barrel's filling up and sanctification. Therefore, kulan psulin, every single one of those barrels is going to be disqualified, chutz mina achreina, except for the last one, because the last one has no other work done after it. Because the first one becomes disqualified by the work that you did in filling up the next barrel before you sanctified it, which is the filling up a second barrel. And the second barrel becomes disqualified by filling up the third barrel. Only the last one is acceptable. You take the last one, you put some ash, and you make it holy for Parah Adumah. Halacha hey. Let's now bring in a bunch of people. Till now it's one person. What if it's a bunch of different people? Chamisha shemilu chamesh chaviyos. 5 people are filling up Parah Adumah waters in 5 different barrels. Lekadshan chamisha kiddushin. And their intention is, they don't want to mix, they don't want to share water. Each one wants to get ash and sanctify his own barrel. Yeah, you're going to put ash into everyone on its own. Then while they're filling up, like, you know what, look, we're all filling up Parah Adumah water anyways. Let's just make it all one big happy water barrel. They change their mind, they want to mix it up and sanctify it all as one. Or the opposite, they first filled it up with the intention to mix all 5 barrels into one. They change their mind, and they're going to make it all separate. Each one's going to have a separate sanctification. So if you think about it, the way the commentaries explain it, as each one is filling up the barrel, they're each filling up their own barrel. Yeah, nobody is mixing into anybody else's water, that's for sure. The barrels, when they're being filled up, are being filled up as separate barrels. So therefore, no matter what their intention is and what it's switched to in terms of the sanctification, kulan kshedim, it's all kosher. Because no individual did any work while he was filling up his barrel. Whatever you do that later is separate issue. But while you were filling up your barrel, all you were doing was filling up your barrel, and that's it. But if, let's say, it would be an individual that was filling up 5 different barrels, and he has in mind to ultimately sanctify each one separately, now it's going to make a big difference if he changes his mind. Even if later on he changes his mind and he decides, you know what, I want to do it all one big sanctification, which typically, in the case where he did it one after another and that was his intention to begin with, we said there's no problem. Because as long as you're filling up multiple barrels to then be sanctified as one, it's all considered one big milui, and none of them is considered to be malacha. But over here, because your original intention was to sanctify them each separately, so in your head, the minute you started filling up the second barrel, you're filling it up before you sanctified the first one. That was your original thought, right? You're supposed to fill up one barrel and sanctify it. So, therefore, ein kasher ala achrin. It's like a classic case of filling up 5 different barrels for 5 different kiddushin, which we just said before, only the last one is kosher. Which, by the way, the commentaries say is only if you ended up going back to your original thought and sanctifying each barrel separately. If indeed you follow through with your new thought and mix everything together, so the whole thing is disqualified, even the last one. Because the last one is now mixed with the earlier waters, which became disqualified by your thought, which became disqualified by the malacha that you did after filling up the first barrel by filling up the second barrel. So, that's the case where the individual filled up 5 different barrels with the original intent to do 5 separate sanctifications and changed his mind to one. What if it's the opposite? Milon lekadsham kiddush echad. He filled up 5 different barrels with the original intent to sanctify them only once, which is again is fine, because it's all one big milui till you get to the kiddush. No none of the additional filler-uppers are considered to be melacha that are interruptions. But then, v'nimlach lekadshon chamisha kiddushin. You change your mind, and now you're going to go and make 5 separate sanctifications. So here, ein kosher elazeh shekidesh b'tchila. Only the very first one is going to be kosher, because the very first one will basically treat it like your original one sanctification that you wanted to do, which is fine to do after you fill up all the water. But the moment you go to sanctify a second one, you've already done work between filling it up and sanctifying it by sanctifying some other barrel. So therefore, only the first one that you sanctify is going to be kosher. Same thing if you would have told somebody else. Now, what does it mean you would have told somebody else? So we're going to go with the approach in the commentaries that we're talking about the very same case that we just left off with. The individual filled up 5 different barrels with the intent to make them only one sanctification. Then, before he does anything, he turns to a friend and he says, you know what? Forget this. I filled up 5 different barrels. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't want to do Parah Adumah water at all. Kadesh lecha es elu. Here, take all these barrels. They're present from me to you. Go sanctify them. Do whatever you want with them. I don't want any business in this. So, ein kasher elazu sheniskatsha mehen batchila. The problem just transfers from one person to the other. When the second person will start sanctifying the barrels, he now becomes the owner of these barrels, and it's the same thing. When he sanctifies the first barrel, that's good, because no malacha was done. The minute he starts sanctifying the second barrel, he's already done work between the filling up of that barrel and the sanctification of it. So therefore, it's disqualified. Avalim amar lo kadesh li es elu. But if the individual who had first filled up the 5 barrels to do one sanctification turns to a friend and says, not I don't want any part in this water at all, I'm gifting it to you. I just want you to be my agent. You go and do the sanctification for me, kadesh li, these barrels. Hare kulan ksherin. So now actually they're all going to be kosher. Shari lekidush echad milan. Because the first person originally wanted to make them all one sanctification, which means that the filling up of the barrels was not a malacha because his intention was to go to one sanctification. It's all one long milah. The afal pisha nimlach aleha lekatra chamisha kiddushin. Even though he changed his mind and wants 5 separate sanctifications, hare lekideshu ela acher kiddush lo. He didn't do it. Someone else did it. And as we saw already once alluded to, and we're going to see it again. When you do work for somebody else, it doesn't disqualify it unless the work was done in the act of filling up. But after the act of filling up is done, work for somebody else doesn't disqualify somebody else's Parah Adumah water. And therefore, he gets off the hook and all of his barrels are kosher. Halacha vav, haroitze lemalis mayim lekadshon umayim acherim litzrachav. Let's say a person, today with running water it's very hard to understand, but in those days it was very big. It was a very big deal to get water, to schlep up and down. So people went to get water. They typically got water for whatever they needed. So let's say a person is going to get water, and he wants to get water for Parah Adumah, but also for his drinking purposes. So the Rambam gives you good advice how to make sure that all the water stays kosher. Person should fill up the water that he needs for his own needs first. Tie them up, load them up on your back. And then fill up the Parah Adumah waters, and we'll see in a second, put them in the front of you. This way, you don't do any work after the filling up. If you fill up Parah Adumah water first, then you go fill up your water for your family, that's work. So first, fill up the water for your family, then fill up Parah Adumah water, put them in the front of you, and you go. Why put them in the front of you? So we'll see in chapter 10, the pasuk says, it has to be guarded. Guarded means when you're dealing with Parah Adumah water, you have to be fully focused and attentive to it. Halacha zayin. Shnayim shayu memalim kol echad ve'echad la'atzma. 2 people were filling up Parah Adumah water. Each one was filling up water for himself. V'higbiu ze al ze. But they didn't realize the water is heavy. They chose a very big barrel, and they couldn't pick it up. So they helped each other lift the barrel onto their shoulders. V'natal ze la ze kaitz miyadai ay migufay b'shas miluay. Or they helped each other with a little splinter. The commentaries say the splinter was in a place which would get in the way of the filling up. Let's say it was in the palm of the hand. So it's very uncomfortable to fill up the water or to grab the utensil when you have a splinter in your palm. But you can't always get out your own splinter. You need 2 hands sometimes. So you get the friend to take out your splinter, and you took out the friend's splinter. It has to be a splinter which is getting in the way of the filling up. So it's not a separate malacha. Imilu shneim lekiddush echad, says the Rambam, if both of them were filling up the water with the intention to ultimately sanctify them only together as one, hamayim kshedim, then the water is kosher, because it's all one big milui. and the malacha which they did was litzoyrech hamili, was for the necessity of the filling up, and therefore it's kosher. But if they had filled it up, and each one planned to sanctify his own water on his own, then the person who helped the other guy lift the barrel, or took out the splinter, disqualified his own water. Because here he's doing work together with the filling up of his own water. Even though he's helping a friend, but the water that he's filling up is for somebody else. It's not going to end up benefiting him. So therefore, you don't consider it to be one unit, and whoever did the malacha disqualifies the water. Halacha ches, hashoyel, chevel, lemalis boy, umile. Many times water was not in a stream, water was in a well, so you needed to borrow a rope to be able to lower your bucket or to lower your bottle or your barrel into the well. Hashoyel, chevel, lemalis boy, umile. A person borrows a rope to fill up Parah Adumah water, and he indeed fills up the Parah Adumah water. He takes the rope in hand after he's done, and the water is on his shoulder. And he happens to meet the owner of the rope on his way. And as he's walking, throws the rope to the guy who owns it. Ksherin, that's kosher, that's not called doing work after the milah. But if he veers off the road to give the rope to the owner, then he disqualifies the water. Why? Because he went out of his way for something which has nothing to do with filling up the water. Commentaries say this tells us that just walking extra long, if he takes a long cut because he likes the scenic route or whatever it is, likes just to have a view or quieter nature, taking a longer walk is not a problem. It's taking a longer walk with a purpose that's not related to the water. That's when it disqualifies. Halacha tes. A person lowers, he has this rope, he lowers it into the well, and the way it works is that you have to, once the water collects in the bucket, you have to pull out the rope, and as we'll see in a second, typically the way this was done was that you would wrap the rope around your hand as the rope came up. But this person is not doing that. This person, as he's stepping out the rope, he's just dumping it behind him on the ground. A person is filling up Parah Adumah water, and he throws the rope that he's filling up with on the ground as he's raising it from the well. And then after he finishes filling up the water, in other words, now he's brought the bucket to the top and he has it, he then wraps the rope all around his hand. Paslan, he has disqualified the water, because that extra wrapping around is work. But if he's drawing it up and wrapping it into his hand as he's going along, since that's the normal way, plus it's also tzerech hamiloi, therefore hamayim ksherim, the water remains kosher. Halacha yut. Hamemale v'noisim lechavis ad sheyamaleno mayim. A person is filling up water in the following way. So maybe we'll go back to the picture of the milui just to see how this was done. Many times, you ultimately wanted to walk away with a barrel full of water, but you're not going to dump the whole barrel into the stream. It gets way too heavy to pick it up. So instead you leave the barrel on the edge of the river, you take a small container and you fill up a little water and you pour it into the big barrel. That's what the person is doing over here. A person is filling up water from the stream and he's putting it into a barrel till it gets filled up with water. Now, because he's dealing with two utensils at the same time, and maybe the example I gave wasn't so accurate, maybe the stream is a little bit of a walk down, let's say. He didn't want to bring the barrel all the way with him. So the barrel is in a little bit of an easier location to handle, and then he has to walk down back to the stream to fill up each time the small container. So while he walks down, he kind of hides the bigger barrel so it shouldn't get broken while he goes down for another refill of his smaller container. Or he turned it over on its mouth because he wants to dry it from any other water that may have remained before, as we'll see that if you have water that's not holy mixed with Parah Adumah water, the whole water becomes disqualified. So here he has a massive barrel that he wants to fill a Parah Adumah water with, but he needs to make sure that it's dry. So he turns it over while he goes down to fill up the small container. So the Rambam says it depends why you did what you did. Lim maloisba, if you did it to be able to fill up water with it. In other words, you were simply doing what you're doing with the bigger barrel just to be an agent of filling up this barrel with water. Kosher, then it's kosher what you did. Shezem mitzayre chamilihu, because what you did is necessary for the filling up of the water. Avalim hitzniya nigva, But if the reason you put it away, or the reason like you hid it away, or the reason that you're drying the barrel is because you want to be able to then later, after it's sanctified, move this barrel, pasal. Now you've disqualified it. Because you did work with this barrel after filling up the Parah Adumah water, which is not for the needs of the Parah Adumah, of the actual filling up. You're doing it in advance of a future step in the process. Same thing if you filled up Parah Adumah water, you're putting it into a trough. And you're moving out, some have tcharsis, some have charasim, you're moving out the shards of pottery that collected over there to make space for more water. So is that moving of the shards a malacha? If it's with the purpose of holding more water, you're moving away the shards to get more Parah Adumah water in, very good. That is for the needs of the filling up of the water. But if it's in advance, you're moving around the shards now. So when the water finishes collecting, I can easily be transferred into another container without getting blocked or backed up by the shards. Now it's disqualified because you've done a malacha that's not for the direct need of the milui. Halacha Yud Aleph, hamemale dli lishtos. A person is filling up a bucket initially with the intent that he's thirsty, he wants to drink. V'nimlach v'chishev alav lemechatas, and on its way down, on the bucket's way down, he decides, you know what, forget the thirst, Parah Adumah water. That's what I want this water to be for. So, the thing is like this. The moment you let the bucket down with the intention to fill it up for water that has to do with your thirst, that's already disqualified. The thing is, the bucket hasn't yet reached the water. No water has entered the bucket. Therefore, it depends at what point you had this change of heart. If the change of heart happened before the bucket reached the water, so we don't want people thinking that you can use water that was filled for drinking, for Parah Adumah. So whatever water that comes up afterwards, we're going to make you pour it out. But you don't have to dry the utensil. Whatever water remains is okay, because if you think about it, at the end of the day, when it was actually filled up, it was filled up with the right intention. However, if the bucket already touched the water, and that's when you had the change of heart, that you want it instead of drinking to fill your thirst, you want it for Parah Adumah water, then ma'arev etzarech l'nagev. You got to pour out whatever water you got, and you have to dry the utensil so no disqualified water remains. V'achar kach yimale b'lechatas, and then you can go and fill it up for Parah Adumah. What about a similar case? Shilshel hadli v'nifsak hachevel miyadeh. Same case. You're thirsty initially, you're lowering the bucket, and then you have a change of heart to Parah Adumah water, but over here you lost hold of the rope. The rope snapped. And now the bucket is going against your will into the water. You don't control it at all. So therefore one might think that now whatever happens, it's as if the bucket already reached the water because you can't control it. Nevertheless, as at least the Kesef Mishnah changes the text in Halacha to match the first case, this case is exactly the same as when you have control. If you had the change of heart before the bucket smashes into the water, when you get hold of the bucket somehow, you pour out the water, no need to dry it up, because again, you had the change of heart before it hit the water, so we'll make you pour it out so people shouldn't get confused, but we're not going to make you dry it. But if you changed your mind after it already came into contact with the water, the word Eidehu usually means still in the water. It's a little bit of a difficulty according to the Kesef Mishnah, but that's how we're going to translate it. If you changed your mind while it already hit the water, and you then thought about it to use it for Parah Adumah, and here again, many Rambams have but the Kesef Mishnah writes v'tzarich l'nagev. You have to pour it out, and you have to dry whatever is in there, because once it hits the water and then you have change of heart, the whole water is disqualified, and in order to reuse it, you have to dry it out. Mayim shemilan lemechatas. If you have water which was filled up for Parah Adumah, the achar shenismale chishev alein lishteisan, and the other way. So the first case was you're thirsty, then you change your mind to Parah Adumah. Here you filled it up for Parah Adumah, then you change your mind to thirsty. You want to drink it. So here, kesheyate es hakli lishtais pasal hamayim. The moment you turn the container towards your mouth to start drinking, you disqualify the water, afal pisha le'shasa mihan klum, even though you didn't drink anything from it. However, as the commentaries point out, here the thought is not enough. When it comes from being thirsty to Parah Adumah, just the thought creates the change. When it goes from Parah Adumah to being thirsty, you have to actually verbally express it. You have to verbally say, I want to use this water instead of Parah Adumah to fill my thirst. And then, the moment that you tilt the container, disqualifies the water.